All right, Craig, we're live.
Yes.
So thank you again for doing this. I just said this to you, but I do want to again reiterate how much I appreciate you taking time to do this stuff. So
You're welcome.
So I'm a little offended because I found out that we've been doing so many different interviews, and then I find out maybe a few months ago that you're Satoshi. So that actually, I was like, well, why didn't he tell me that? All these times. So I thought what I would do. So here's how we're going to start this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, okay, so if Craig is Satoshi, so, a little rude not to tell me that all this time. I thought we could talk about quotes from Satoshi, and then you can expand on that so that other people can learn the importance of Bitcoin. How does that sound?
You mean rather than cherry picking them out of context?
So, yeah, I found most people don't know some of these exist. So how about we talk about some of them, okay?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
All right. So we're going to start with the first one that I think is the most important one that people don't understand the importance of. But Satoshi Nakamoto wrote, "The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust."
Yes.
So how does Bitcoin solve that problem?
Basically, because it's a globally distributed system, it means that there's no single point where people can start altering and changing how the money issue occurs. Now, you can still do other things such as tokenizing fiat in individual areas, and that will then compete. But the underlying system is solid. So if you look at where gold goes wrong, where silver goes wrong throughout history, it's because of uncertainty. Now, this is what people don't seem to understand. The problem with monetary value is if it's not certain, people can't plan. Now, there was something called the reign of silver and gold. This was after the Americas were sort of found by old Chris Columbus and Vasco da Gamas and America and all the other Spanish and Portuguese guys. What started happening was all the gold and silver from these regions was pillaged and taken back to Europe, so either to Portugal or Spain, and particularly to Spain, where these galleons would come in once a year, laden with sort of precious metals in what was, as I said, called the reign of silver and gold. Because it was called that because it was like it would wash off the roof and down the drains. The gold devalued throughout Europe rapidly because so much came in. Because gold isn't wealth. Gold isn't wealth like people think. Wealth is things we create. Wealth is food. Wealth is housing. Wealth is things we produce in society. Wealth is clothes. Wealth is haircuts. Wealth is everything like that. That's wealth. Wealth is what we actually produce, the capital and other things. So the measure, the gold to say how much of that you have isn't wealth. Now, the problem there is as it flowed into Europe, people stopped working where it first hit. So the Spanish became lazy rather than having to work and earn and become a nation of shopkeepers, as they called the British, who had to actually go out there and develop and earn things like the Dutch. They started just buying stuff from the rest of Europe because we've got money suddenly. And it very quickly came in and came out because they weren't doing anything else other than washing money through their country. They very quickly became lazy and backwards and didn't develop an attitude of having to work for what they're doing. And the problem there is everything came in, everything went out, and once the money sort of stopped and it dried up, they were left with nothing.
But so now we have cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrency isn't a fiat currency, right? So haven't we?
No, it's not. Fiat just means by decree. So it just means by decree. So any money issued by government by decree.
So why does Bitcoin solve the problem and not Ethereum? If Ethereum's not a fiat currency, right? So there's no trust involved there.
doesn't scale for a start. They don't understand that the smaller block time is not an issue. It's just a misunderstood technology. They never took the time to actually work out how Bitcoin actually works, why it scales. They ignored my initial quotes. They have this idea that everyone should run a node, and they wanted to make something along those lines. It's the opposite of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a capitalist system. They want to make a socialist system. They'll call it anarchist, but the reality is if everyone is equal, then it's Marxist and it is purely exactly communist. I mean, that's what it is.
So that's actually a good. So my next quote here that I had from Satoshi Nakamoto is, the current system where every user is a network node is not the intended configuration for large scale. That would be like every Usenet user runs their own NNTP server. The design supports letting users just be users. The more burden it is to run a node, the fewer nodes there will be. Those few nodes will be big server farms. The rest will be client nodes that only do transactions and don't generate.
Now, I've said this multiple times. I put through the point when I was talking with James Donald. I put through the point with Bear. I said the point with Hell. I said the point with other people on the Bitcoin Talk forum, which was actually the Bitcoin forum before they moved it over. I argued the point with Mike Hearn, who actually got it. I said again and again, Bitcoin scales with large professional nodes. Eventually, I mean, that was the argument about don't spam the network, where they, in one line in Bitcoin Talk, what everyone points out, I said you shouldn't spam the network that way. Bitcoin's not ready for it. What I said at the time, we were talking about transactions of 100,000th of a cent. I said Bitcoin isn't ready. At that time, it would be 5 to 10 years between 2015 and 2020 before Bitcoin could do the smaller side of microtransactions. What I said, Bitcoin's only good for the transactions in the order of 1/10 to a cent for microtransactions in 2020. So 1/10 of a cent is still small. I said it needs to scale and professionalize. And I said one way that that would actually happen would be professional server farms would be developed. Now, people say don't spam the network because whatever else. At the time, we were talking 100,000th of a cent was what was being discussed there. And then later I said, as I do, I said this first quote, and then I need to correct that and add. And no one reads the bit where I said that. They ignore where I expound further and say, this is what needs to happen. In 5 to 10 years, disk space will be cheaper, processing will be cheaper, etc. And we will move to professional server farms. Now, I want to give you a thought exercise. If you have 1,000 nodes and they're all equal, then you can discover, on average, a block every week or two per node. Now, take that up to 4 billion people. 4 billion people all running their own node and all equal. That means not every 2 weeks or every week or whatever else. That means every 4 million times that. 4 million times a week.
But then we're all equally poor. Isn't that good?
Exactly. So why would you invest in infrastructure if you know, well, basically we have the tragedy of the Bitcoin commons, because once everyone's equal, then everyone sits there as a negative externality going, why should I invest my money protecting this network when I'm going to win a block maybe every 4,000 years? Why would I do that? I don't actually have any opportunity to benefit. So that's the problem. None of these people seem to understand. You can't get around that. And, they'll go, oh, but we'll just make it a block every nanosecond.
So then what did Satoshi mean when he wrote the white paper and he said the steps to run the network are as follows? And if I'm reading this correctly, in order to run the network, you find a proof of work and broadcast it to all nodes. Why would he say that?
Nodes are miners. Read section 8, read SPV. I mean, basically what you're doing is saying everyone has to be a miner. Well, no, it doesn't say everyone has to be a miner. It says in the paper, users run simplified payment verification, which isn't what Mike Hearn came up with, which isn't the other things which I've started talking about and explaining. Is very simple. I keep a copy of my message. I send it. Peer-to-peer isn't just the miners. There's an overlay network. There are two peer-to-peer networks in Bitcoin. One is the miners act in a peer-to-peer network. The miners together verify. But that is only about solving the double spend problem. We pay these guys to act as a distributed body to ensure the network maintains that way. But the real aspect of Bitcoin is peer-to-peer. If I want to deal with you, I don't send a transaction to the miners. I can, but the reality is I send it to you. That's what peer-to-peer means. That's why I had IP to IP and other such things in the original version of Bitcoin, that soon as I started, I left after they wanted to make heroin stores and things. As soon as that happened, they stripped it. The key aspect of peer-to-peer is things like IP to IP. And the argument was it's not secure. You can man in the middle things. It was an alpha and then beta code version when I released it. So if you wanted to be a big sort of successful dev, you don't break it. You could have fixed like banks do, like Google does, all this stuff. There's a reason they stripped out IP to IP and didn't fix the man in the middle bit. Because if you have secure SSL, if you do that, then you know the IP of the person. And you and I have logs. And that doesn't work for drug and illicit sites. It doesn't work for, if you're doing IP to IP and you're recording information securely, it doesn't work for dark websites where you have Tor and things like this. That was the whole point. They don't want Bitcoin. They don't want something that isn't, there's 15 mentions of honest or so in the white paper. They don't want an honest system. They want BitGold, anonymous, so that they can steal money, defraud people. They want Greg Maxwell's whole business plan, which basically started well before Bitcoin, which is he writes extortionware and sells extortionware. People don't seem to understand that. Sue me, Greg. I've got evidence. Please, Greg, sue me.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to mention, again, there's so many quotes that I'm just like, this is interesting. But Satoshi Nakamoto wrote, "We don't want to lead with anonymous." And then he makes another quote that says, so he's quoting someone else that says, "The developers expect that this will result in a stable with respect to energy currency outside of the reach of any government." And Satoshi responds saying, "I am definitely not making any such taunt or assertion." And then they write, "Sorry to be a wet blanket. Writing a description for this thing for general audiences is bloody hard."
Yes. So everyone else is going, it attacks government. Government. No, it doesn't. I keep saying that. And everyone goes, that's what you meant. No, I didn't. I didn't ever mean that. You guys said that. I said, no, it's not. And you come back and go, oh, but you must have meant that. No, I never did. No, I didn't attack banks. No, I didn't attack governments. There is no quote ever in the entire history of when I wrote as Satoshi to anyone, including some of the people I've got lawsuits started against, like Adam Back, who, yeah, funny how people I talk to and have private communications and whatever else I'm sort of bringing up into court. But These people want something else. They want a system of drug money. But governments can stop these things easily. Government can't stop something that is only illegal in their country. So the Americans would not be able to stop something like a Canadian pot store. If a Canadian pot store who cannot get banking, but is legal, pot is legal in Vancouver. I mean, so if people want to do that, fine. People in Vancouver who can't get banking, who are doing something legal, can use Bitcoin. And the Americans can't stop that. On the other hand, if you look at Liberty Reserve had basically terrorist funding organizations, hard drugs, all that stuff going through it. It had people like Mr. Maxwell's friends in extortionware. All those things were going through Liberty Reserve. And the reality there is, because that was something that practically every government on earth, maybe apart from the sort of Congo region, bans. 42 countries acted in concert. The takedown of Liberty Reserve occurred over 42 countries. You tell me you can run a mining operation in Sierra Leone with billions of dollars invested and ensure that you're going to be, as a miner, certain that you're not going to be taken over by a group of warlords or rebels. Go for it. Try. On the other hand, if you choose in China or America or Canada to go, screw you, Bitcoin's for terrorist funding, like Amir or whatever his name is, idiot, total fool, wanker, and that's me being nice. The guy is used toilet water, and that's being generous to, I mean, his brain is obviously flushed through a freaking bloody sewer. If you're having that view of what cryptocurrency is, basically you're going to find yourself bent over and some large appendaged person's going to teach you the hard way of what Bitcoin's really about. And I'm sorry, an immutable evidence trail is not good for terrorist funding. Use it and be tracked. I'm very happy for people involved with terrorist funding to use Bitcoin, because I want to see them taken and put into jail and never, ever see the light of day. I want to see them have 10 times the life sentences of Ross Ulbricht. If we have a way of keeping people alive for 500 years, I want to see them in jail, hard labor, for all 500 years before we let them die. So, and Ross Ulbricht deserves to be in prison. That simple. And other people who helped him, who are basically out there with the anti-Crag campaigns at the moment because they're a bunch of criminals and they want drug money, should be with him. And they will be if they use Bitcoin.
Okay, I'm gonna back up. We're actually going to get back to privacy. I think that's actually important. What Satoshi wrote. Before I get there, I want to talk about something that everyone tells us is broken in Bitcoin, which is zero confirmation payments. Right.
Oh.
So hang on. I know. Hang on. So I'm just going to read again. I'm just quoting posts under the Satoshi Nakamoto moniker, and there's actually quite a bit to go through, but I'm going to cherry pick a few things here. But Satoshi wrote, "I believe it'll be possible for a payment processing company to provide as a service the rapid distribution of transactions with good enough checking in something like 10 seconds or less." He then goes on to describe how a payment processor would work. They would be densely connected. And then finally, I just want to take this. And then he writes specifically, "I did not say that it is impermeable. I said good enough. The loss this would be far lower than credit cards." And
Bitcoin is economic security. That's all it needs to be. And you have law. Now, think about it. do you really care if someone rips you off a cent? You just close your account. Big deal. Okay. So if you're watching a movie and their payments don't keep updating on your system, and you're able to settle every 5 minutes, why do you care? Think about it. You've got a 90-minute movie, and 45 minutes into it, someone rips you off the last 5 minutes. They haven't finished the movie. Whoop-de-doo-dah. I mean, honestly, that's just how you look at it. Don't worry about that sort of stuff. I mean, if they've stopped halfway through, they probably didn't like the movie anyway. Make a better movie.
And it's after this where we find the infamous quote of, "If you don't believe it or don't get it, I don't have time to convince you. Sorry." Does that get frustrating? Is it frustrating having to explain simple things about Bitcoin?
Yes, I tried to actually answer things by stepping back and not getting aggravated as I do at times. One thing you'll notice is the more aggravated I get, the worse my typing and spelling and everything like that gets. And everyone says, Satoshi was perfect spelling and whatever else. No, I checked my spelling most of the time. But you'll actually see that there are spelling errors right back in 2008. If you look at my conversations with James Donald, as we're going on, I start misspelling things. I actually make errors on simple words because the guy frustrated me to no end. This whole everyone needs to run nodes and the government's going to stop. Wacky people like that frustrate the hell out of me. These people need to live in the real world. I've been to sort of the Congo region, and I've been to Sierra Leone, and I've been to other nations that were in war and things like this back in the 90s. And because I used to do, you probably haven't heard the term, but I was a suitcase man. Suitcase man was, I did forensic work. So I was a civilian guy that would go out there and capture computers, capture hard drives, whatever else at times for some of the government things. And because like the jarheads and the frogs and whatever else would call us suitcase men because we had the big metal suitcase that had stuff in it. But basically, when you see a country that has no order, the first thing that happens is someone who's more powerful takes control. This idea that we can have a system that's anarchist and everyone will be nice. I'm sorry, we're not angels. I mean, it's the old, if men were angels bit. We're not. I mean, I've said this one before, and this is why they like to say I'm a sociopath. They should be thankful, very thankful that we have laws. I actually believe in law and all that stuff. But there are probably a few people that I'd walk up and put a bullet in the head of if we didn't have law to stop me.
All right, well, pass that one. Because actually, you're bringing up an interesting point, and you brought it up earlier, which, again, just happens to be a quote about this. So call me crazy, but I'm starting to think you might be this person. Satoshi wrote, the network, oh God, I'm losing it here, but he said something along the lines of, the network is vulnerable as it's small, but as it scales, security increases. And what I find actually ironic, I suppose, is that the people who are opposed to Bitcoin in the form that it exists today, they don't want to scale Bitcoin very quickly, which actually makes it more vulnerable to the government that they don't like, right?
Yeah, that's the irony. And it becomes harder to take down legitimate Bitcoin than it does to make illegitimate Bitcoin. I mean, this idea that, hey, we can be outside the law. I'm sorry, you can't. Liberty Reserve, 42 countries, 10,000 providers were taken down. There's less in BTC than 30 nodes, real nodes around the world. The reality is there are less than 30 real nodes. Your Raspberry Pi means shit all. Your listener node means shit all. If you don't create blocks, you're not a node. It's in the code base. When I released it, you don't create blocks, you're doing nothing. You're a Sybil. You're the thing Bitcoin protects against. You're a parasite node. Basically, you're a tapeworm.
You know, actually, if you go back through the snack machine thread, ironically, in your response about zero confirmation payments being secure because of payment processors or whatever else, someone actually says specifically, it's a good thing Bitcoin is not set up as, you know, one IP, one vote, because then someone could do exactly what you're discussing here. I just found that kind of interesting, because you must be encouraged in some degree, and then things become.
I can't even remember who it was now. I should. There was a guy back in July 2010. Don't ask me why. He reminds me of Where's Wally. I'm probably being really mean. I'm not meaning to be, but I keep thinking of Where's Wally when I think of him. But while the whole heroin store thread was going on, that a few people like Marty Melmy, Ross Ulbricht, and whatever else sort of used to create their let's create something really stupid bit. This guy came in with some rational thought and said, why would you do that? Why not just a pot store? I mean, if you're going to talk about hard drugs, the first thing people will probably start thinking about child porn, and you don't want all these things. It's going to bring the sort of argument I was supporting. And he got shot down. He got torn apart, and people basically did the don't be stupid type argument once again. And I mean, that's the problem. All these idiots that got attracted to Bitcoin in the first place, these extropians and things like this, it's just insane. I mean, I was involved with some of the cypherpunk stuff in the 90s, and I saw it bad enough then because it was the early days of the internet, and if you were involved heavily in running ISPs and things like that, as I was, and security, then you just became part of it. Like it or not, that's where it worked. And I didn't like the fact that Americans were trying to say, where I was working at the time, Australian Stock Exchange couldn't have 128-bit certificates because we can't monitor them. And my comment was very simple. It was, I don't give a rat's. I'm not American, and I'm Australian, and we're running Australian organizations. So they tried to get me in trouble because I released a Firefox patch when I was working at the Australian Stock Exchange to basically allow 128-bit on Microsoft systems for our brokers and everything like that got out. And Americans came back and said I was actually helping distribute munitions. And my thing was, I'm not American, so I'm not exporting munitions in America. Your problem. So that's why I was involved back then. But the irony here is all these people got wackier. They didn't get saner. They got even stupider. I mean, I like people like Tim May and Hell and whatever else on a personal level, but some of their ideas got to the point of absolute stupidity. And I had arguments with people about that sort of stuff many times, like the whole extropian idea that we're all going to be uploaded into computers, but the computers exist in the real world. Bitcoin doesn't change that. If we turn off all those computers, you're dead.
From a personal level, I guess, just out of curiosity, was your own experience with the Liberty Reserve, did that in any way make you more confident in Bitcoin moving forward? Did it make you pessimistic, or obviously you had your own experience with Liberty Reserve shutdown, and I guess I'm just curious about that.
Yes, it did. My American government still wouldn't like what I was doing, which was gaming. But then the gambling operations I was working with were actually legally licensed, just not in America. So I wrote code and other things for quite a number of casinos. Hence why I know a lot of people that I work with now. I mean, my background includes CentreBet and SportingBet and Lassiter's and Playboy Gaming and a whole pile of things. So I'm not anti-gambling. If people want to do it responsibly, good. And that's the key here, responsibly. Like, people don't understand that Lassiter's had a whole lot of policies around people who said that they had a problem or had been reported by family to have a problem and things like this. So if you were a gambling addict, we would actually work to make sure that you wouldn't waste all your money, which is very different to something like a illegal casino where they'll take everything you have and then bankrupt you afterwards.
So we're gonna keep moving along. I know this is probably tiring for you to do this, but I think this might be effective in helping people have some truth put into their veins here. So one of the last things I wanted to talk about was you came on the scene in about 2015 on a panel with Nick Szabo, and you said the very controversial statement that Bitcoin was Turing complete.
Yes.
But what I happen to find interesting is that I'm going to read one more quote for you here, which is, the nature of Bitcoin is such that once version 0.1 was released, the core design was set in stone for the rest of its lifetime. Because of that, I wanted to design it to support every possible transaction type I could think of.
And then some.
And then the design supports a tremendous variety of possible transaction types that I designed years ago. Escrow transactions, bonded contracts, third-party arbitration, multi-party signature, etc. So it sounds like Satoshi happened to be aware that Bitcoin was capable of more complex computation than what people give it credit for.
Really? Funny that.
I just wanted to, okay.
Yeah, but you see, the argument that started right after I left, so a number of the people in core started arguing Bitcoin was broken unless we have smaller transactions, unless we make it more confidential, unless we, etc. So that's where these things like Minwimble and sort of associated bullshit come into it. The idea of trying to make it more of an anti-government money laundering system was really about removing all these extra features. See, I never saw a system outside of law. I saw a system that worked in law.
Well, we established that that's true. So that's good to know. And so let's now move forward, I guess. So now it is July 2019. Yesterday, Bitcoin upgraded to a 2 gigabyte hard cap block size.
Yep.
And it seems to me, and you can tell me if this is correct. So Satoshi wrote on the transition from the block reward to transaction fees, the transition is not controlled by some human in charge of the system, though, just individuals reacting on their own to market forces. And so my question to you would be that now that Bitcoin SV has done this, is Bitcoin SV fulfilling Satoshi's vision for removing central control over the block cap?
Of course. I mean, this is how I design. That's what we're trying to get back to. We want, by February next year, to fairly much get back to the original vision of Bitcoin that I had. And yes, the code will be different, but if you look at some of the communications I had with Mike Hearn and Bear and others, I said, we need to parallelize code to be able to scale. And so I talked about server farms, professionalization, and parallelizing code, because I'm shit at parallelized code. I can do a single threaded thing. And I mean, I used to teach C, C++, C#, and a couple other things in university, but there's a big difference between, being like I used to do, which was mainly security reviews of code and pulling apart other people's errors, to making something elegant and good. And I know some people used to say Bitcoin was really good code and whatever else. Case statements aren't all that effective, especially when you're cascading through operations. There are better ways of doing all this. It's just, that's how I coded. So the way that it was isn't terribly good for parallelized operations. But then I also said that in future it will move to parallelized operations. Actually, I said that to people.
Into the original code, there's a comment specifically.
Yeah. So if I say that, I actually did mean it.
I mean, but we're 10 years later, and there's been little work done outside of it from your company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that frustrating at all?
It was very frustrating. I mean, back in 2013, 14, I had companies in Australia, and we were, what we called it at the time was iDemon. No one lets me name anything anymore. Other people name things now. They take me away from marketing and just sort of slowly walk me out of the room if marketing's being mentioned. But the concept here, I mean, the problem I had when I was actually building this, every time I was trying to do something, Core would screw something else up and change something else in the code, and we'd have to go back and start redesigning it, because it's actually more effort to redesign something in parallel than it is the way that they have it. So when they changed some of the opcodes and things like that, they made life really difficult because they didn't want a scaled data center version of Bitcoin. And they just won't understand that there's never going to be a completely equal version of Bitcoin that works. One of the things I talked about when we were actually there in Colombia together was I had something on a way of using sort of a square mod function and numerical proofs to do something linked to individual keys and ownership that would provably allow you to actually demonstrate sort of distributed systems. Not proof of stake, but a proof of work that if you have 1,000 people, it's randomly assigned between those 1,000 people, and you'll be able to do it. So I invented that one years ago, but I've now put a patent on it. And the reality is, if people want to do that, they can. And they'll find out how screwed it really is as an idea. I mean, that was one of the things I invented back in 2005 or so, which was pre-proof of work the way it is now. And the problem was that it didn't really allow you to build a data center. I mean, if you're then having every individual and every person out there individually able to win, then no one invests, and no one gets that. It becomes purely socialist, and the problem there is there's no one to be an entrepreneur, no one to take the system and build information and run with it, and no one will. So
one last quote that we will, and then we can talk about other things, is you wrote that in 20 years, you wrote this in 2009 or 10, I can't remember. In 20 years, there will either be a lot of transaction volume or none at all.
Yes.
And my question to you is, now that we're 10 years in, are you optimistic or pessimistic that we will reach a lot of transaction volume instead of none at all?
I am now. Next year, sort of when we're 10 years in, we'll have now the ability to basically exceed gigabytes worth of blocks and keep scaling, and as we professionalize more and more. We've got some patents that I'll talk about when they're sort of public, about how we can enable people mining to become Adam Smith's pin factory. Someone will run ASICs, someone will order transactions, and all of that can be securely put together, allowing people who have big ASIC farms in China to earn money and not have to worry even about the Chinese firewall. We have a way of getting them to find the sort of solutions to block hashing in a distributed manner that would basically require less than 1 kilobyte worth of traffic. And they could have the hugest of huge Chinese farms, and in a distributed manner have a node in, say, Germany or the UK and LA where they could propagate quickly. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to patent all this stuff because I don't want to see this fragmentation continue. If we're going to build Bitcoin into a global system, it needs to be a global system. It needs, like the internet, you don't have hundreds of internets. It's not the idea that Microsoft and IBM came up with everyone can have their own intranet. No one wants their own intranet. You don't get connectivity. You don't get scale in a network by everyone having their own. And we don't want everyone having their own money, because everyone having their own money is just barter.
Well, it's weird then that it's also weird that Satoshi wrote there is only one global chain. I'll leave it at that.
I don't think it's that weird.
So okay. I actually asked this question when we were in Colombia, but I'd be curious to hear your answer. So it seems pretty obvious, okay, is my perspective. It seems pretty obvious. We've just gone through just about every important aspect of Bitcoin and Satoshi's opinion on that. And then I talk with you, and I'm like, okay, so this guy seems to match up pretty well with everything that Satoshi wrote. And so my question to you is that there are all of these people that cared about Bitcoin at one time, that own businesses, that own, that have some kind of play in the quote unquote Bitcoin crypto ecosystem or whatever. And so my question to you is, are these people dumb? Are they ignorant? Are they, I mean, what is the, where's the disconnect here?
Which ones? Some are dumb and ignorant, and others aren't. Some wanted to build real companies. Some wanted to build real payment providers and got cut off with the Bitcoin's not for that. Bitcoin's about anti-government stuff and all these other silly attacks. Those people were smart, but unfortunately, they had their lives and their businesses and everything ruined by a bunch of assholes. People who just want to shit all over humanity. That's all they are. These people who want, like Roger with his crack cocaine hurts nobody. You fucking moron. I hope you experience what crack cocaine does to people personally, Roger. I mean, to come out there and actually say that. I mean, and then to have these pithy statements about places like Amsterdam and whatever else. Amsterdam isn't free market with drugs. The government highly restricts things. If you're a drug smuggler in Amsterdam, you're fucked. That's simple. What they do is they allow people under certain conditions. So things like weed and whatever else they control and they monitor. On the other hand, if you're going to sell phenol or heroin, and you're a drug dealer, you're in trouble if they catch you. The government issues it and the government monitors it. And what happens is, if you're addicted to heroin, they put you into rehab. Not, do you want to go there? Too bad, you go there. The end. So this is not free market, we get to run drugs. It's a better approach than the Americans have when throwing them in jail and getting people even more addicted to harder things. It's basically, you take them out there and you put them through rehab. If they don't want it, stiff. You do it. That's not free market. Sorry, Roger. Get a fucking life and get a clue. And crack cocaine is not good. Some of the things you're talking about and that your platform supported include people smuggling. Some of the things that some of Charlie Shrem's things were started being used for. Why the guy went to jail for money laundering and some of these other platforms. There were people in Eastern Europe would sign women up, women who'd think they'd be working in a hotel or something in places like France and Spain and whatever else, who would then be have their passports abducted, and they would be injected with a combination of phenytoin and heroin, which is basically addictive after one single injection. And they would get them and screw them up and then rape them and basically put them into prostitution, where they would be raped 50 times a night sometimes. That's your free market, Roger.
So the root question then, I mean, again, I know that you probably don't care, but does Roger Ver know who you are?
Yes, Roger Ver knows who I am. But Roger Ver doesn't want any of this. Roger Ver wants something that allows him to sell his pipe bombs. And they're not fireworks, they're pipe bombs he sold. The things that he was actually buying, people don't realize the firecrackers that he combined were each equivalent to 1/4 stick of dynamite. You put them together, and he put up to 16 together in a pipe bomb. They were enough to actually blow up a building. They were used, the same things Roger was building and selling were used in a terrorist attack in Europe and killed 30 people. That's Roger's, oh, they're just a firecracker. They were used to murder 30 people, the same things that he said were not a problem. The company that sold the things that Roger was selling was shut down because they were criminals. They weren't firecrackers like he was saying, they were bombs. It wasn't just Roger went to jail for this, other people did too, because they were bombs.
So we'll move at the very end here, because as I mentioned, first of all, obviously I respect your time, but last thing I guess I'll just ask you. So Bitcoin Quasar upgrade activates yesterday.
It did.
We are now on the road to Genesis, as
we are,
I believe. And so I guess my just last question for you, just for anyone listening, what can people expect from Bitcoin in its current iteration in the next 6 months, or even now that we have scale like we do today? That's
we're going to get bigger. We're going to build more. We're going to let people come up with anything they want. You see, this BS about permissionless, if you want to have permissionless development, that means, one, you act inside the law. I don't care what you say. There's no, can I make a drug market? No, no one has permission for that. No one in the world ever will. On the other hand, if you want to do a legitimate application, you don't need to ask me. You don't need to ask Steve Shatters. You don't need to ask anyone. You just do it. We don't do anything to stop you. Whereas with Bitcoin and BTC, you have to go to a bunch of developers and go, if I build this, will you block it? If I build this, will you change the protocol? If I build this, will you go out there in a campaign and tell me how bad it is? Will you stop people? Will you have people wear hats opposing what I'm doing because, well, I'm an evil capitalist and I want to make money?
Perfect. I think it's very well said. So, Craig, thanks again for doing this.
You're welcome.
I hope people maybe start getting their heads out of their ass. So we'll see.
The ones that matter will. I mean, the people out there who want to have illicit activities and whatever else are never going to like Bitcoin. I didn't build it for them. I built it for the other 99.98% of the population. I built it for people like we saw in Colombia, people who don't have much money, people who want to send money as remittance. I mean, here's a thing. If you have high fees, it becomes difficult to manage your own life, your own control. So let's take some of the guys that in CentB, they're trying to get the remittance corridor opened up. And there are lots of these. There's the one between South America and the US, there's Asia, there's the corridors around South Africa, there's the European one between the East and the West in Europe. Now, imagine the difference. Rather than getting your money, like you're a woman, you're working in a hotel, you're not earning much, and you don't want to send everything back because you know some people in your family might spend it on drinking or whatever else. You want to control the finances. And whether you like me saying this or not, women are better at controlling household finances than men. The end. They care more about sort of making sure the children are put out there and sort of taken care of first and whatever else. So it's not just my wife, it's 99% of them are better because us guys, well, we have our heads up our asses and the wrong things half the time. And we forget to make the kids lunch and all the rest. So the reality is, we want to enable people to control their own lives. So imagine if you can send back your money and you can only afford it once a month. That's a different scenario and a different market to if you can hold your money and send it back as people need it. Your kids text you and say, Mum, I need this for school. Mum, I need to be able to exchange this now. Mum, you can just, as they're doing things, someone on a smartphone can look at that and go, my kids need $2, send it to them. My husband needs to pay for groceries, send it to him after you check that he hasn't bought 6 bottles of wine and a case of beer. You can go, no, honey, you're taking that off. But chocolate cake's good for the kids, dear. And you could actually have the sort of purchase displayed and go, no, you're going to buy vegetables, honey. Go back and reshop. That's a different market and a different scenario. Imagine when you can actually control in a family what's happening, not just send it back and hope for the best, but the transaction fees are so low that you don't care when you pay as you do. It's a different environment now.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I look forward to more permissionless development to build applications like that. So thanks a lot, Craig. Yeah.
Looking forward to it as well.
Very good. Well, have a good rest of your day here.
You too.
Thanks.
All right. Talk to you soon.